Captain Valeria Cruz stood on the observation deck of the Odyssey, gazing out into the abyss of space, where the stars were no longer just lights in the sky, but ancient beacons of mystery. Before her, like a dark wound in the fabric of the universe, loomed the black hole, the most enigmatic and deadly feature known to science. It had drawn humanity's curiosity for centuries, its pull both literal and metaphorical, inspiring legends and scientific inquiry alike. Yet, here they were, the first mission brave enough or desperate enough to venture inside. The world was watching, of course. A team of astronauts, the brightest minds from across the globe, entrusted with the most daring of missions to explore the unknown and survive. But it wasn't just a mission for science. It was humanity's quest to understand its place in the cosmos, to unlock the secrets of existence itself. What would lie beyond the event horizon? Would they come back with nothing but data, or would they bring back something that would change everything? As Cruz adjusted the controls, her hand trembled ever so slightly. She was no stranger to danger. She had piloted through asteroid fields, navigated solar flares, and dealt with equipment failures on missions too numerous to count. But this was different. This mission had no precedent. There was no manual for how to explore a black hole, no way to predict the uncharted horrors or revelations that awaited them. It was one thing to study the black hole from a distance. It was another thing entirely to fly straight into its maw. "Ready, Captain," came the voice of Dr. Elias Chen, the mission's chief physicist. "We're cleared for entry." She took a deep breath. "Then let's make history." The journey had begun in the stillness of space, the vast emptiness between the stars, filled only by the hum of the ship's engines and the unspoken weight of what lay ahead. The Odyssey was a marvel of engineering, sleek, powerful, and designed to withstand the unimaginable forces of the universe. But even the most advanced technology in human history felt fragile when facing the unknown. The team of 8 astronauts aboard were aware of this, but they had all been trained for this moment, each of them a specialist, handpicked for the mission. Captain Cruz had a quiet confidence in her crew. They were chosen for their adaptability and intellect, but perhaps more importantly, they had the courage to face the vast unknown. She trusted them with her life, and in return, she demanded their absolute trust. But as the ship neared the black hole's event horizon, the mood shifted. The familiar hum of the engines became muffled, as if the ship were being swallowed by the immense gravitational field that enveloped them. Cruz could feel it, an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a strange sensation of inevitability. The black hole was no longer a distant theory. It was something tangible, something real, approaching the event horizon in 3, 2, 1. Dr. Chen's voice broke through her thoughts. The countdown was not merely symbolic. It was a signal, a reminder that the moment they crossed the threshold, there would be no turning back. The ship shuddered. Outside, the stars warped, stretching into long, ghostly streaks of light as they neared the event horizon. Time, space, and reality itself seemed to bend in ways that were both disorienting and awe-inspiring. The crew had been briefed on the physics behind this, but nothing could have prepared them for the visual spectacle of it. Cruz felt her stomach lurch as they crossed the point of no return. The instruments on the bridge went haywire, flashing lights, erratic readings, and incomprehensible data. "What the hell?" muttered Dr. Maya Sterling, the mission's biologist, as she leaned over the console to inspect the readings. "It's just the gravitational disturbance," Dr. Chen explained, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "We've crossed the event horizon. The laws of physics as we know them no longer apply." Cruz's eyes were fixed on the view ahead of them. As the ship plunged deeper into the singularity, the universe around them distorted even further. The black hole, no longer looked like a simple absence of light. It was a writhing, pulsating mass, pulling everything into its center. Then, something unexpected happened. The starboard side of the ship lit up with strange energy patterns, streaks of light that defied explanation. "Captain, we're picking up something." Dr. Chen's voice wavered as he adjusted the instruments. "It's not just radiation. This isn't possible." Before Cruz could respond, a sharp jolt rattled the entire ship. The lights flickered and the crew lurched forward, strapped into their seats. There was no immediate danger, but the turbulence made it clear that they were no longer in control. The black hole was taking them somewhere beyond their comprehension. "Report," Cruz barked. Dr. Chen was silent for a moment, his fingers dancing over the controls, trying to make sense of the data. "I'm getting readings, but they're inconsistent. It's as if we're not just inside the black hole. We're being pulled towards something else. Something alive." Captain Cruz's heart skipped a beat. "Alive? I can't explain it," Dr. Chen said, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's as if there's a structure on the other side, but it's not like anything we've ever seen." A chill ran down Cruz's spine. Theories about black holes had always been clear. They were gateways to nothing, a death trap for any matter that ventured too close. But now, as they moved deeper into the darkness, the physics they had relied on for centuries no longer made sense. "We're not just exploring a black hole," Cruz muttered under her breath. "We're walking into the unknown." The ship lurched again, and this time something strange occurred. The stars outside, which had been twisted into long streaks, suddenly stopped moving. The swirling lights outside seemed to freeze, suspended in time. "Something's wrong," said Dr. Sterling, her voice rising with panic. "We're not just orbiting the black hole anymore. We're inside it, and we're not alone." Before Cruz could respond, another sharp jolt shook the ship, this one far more violent than the others. Alarms blared as the ship's systems went haywire. Then, just as suddenly, everything went quiet. The crew members exchanged uncertain glances, all of them unsure of what to do next. Captain Cruz was the first to recover. "We need to stabilize. All hands on deck. Check every system. We can't afford to make mistakes now." But as the crew scrambled to assess the damage, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching them, waiting. The black hole, it seemed, had more secrets than they could ever imagine. The air in the Odyssey felt thick with tension. It was no longer just the physical pressure of the black hole's gravity that weighed on the crew, but the unnerving sense that they were not alone. An ancient, unseen force was watching them, and every creak of the ship seemed to echo the growing dread in their minds. Captain Valeria Cruz stood at the helm, her eyes glued to the fluctuating screens in front of her. The data from the ship's instruments made no sense. They were deep within the black hole now, deeper than anyone had dared venture. No amount of training had prepared them for this. The distortion of space, the unexplainable anomalies, the eerie silence that seemed to hang over them like a shroud. "Status. Report," Cruz barked, turning to face the crew. They were all hard at work, each of them focused on their own set of instruments, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. "We've lost contact with Earth," Dr. Chen said, his voice strained. "The signals are being distorted beyond recognition. I can barely get a coherent transmission through. It's like we've crossed into some other realm." "That's not possible," said Dr. Maya Sterling, the biologist. "We're still within the event horizon. There shouldn't be any sudden signal loss unless—" Her voice trailed off, and Cruz could see the fear in her eyes. "Unless what?" Cruz pressed. Unless we've crossed into something far more dangerous than we anticipated, Sterling finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Cruz's jaw tightened. We need to focus. We'll figure this out. Dr. Chen, do you have any idea what's happening? Chen's fingers moved rapidly over the console, typing commands and reviewing data streams. It's like we've passed through a veil, he said, his voice shaking slightly. The black hole. It's not just a singularity anymore. It's acting like a gateway to another universe. I'm seeing readings I can't explain. Energy signatures, electromagnetic pulses, even spatial distortions. Nothing on our side of the universe behaves like this. But that doesn't make sense, Cruz countered, her brow furrowed. We're supposed to be in the core of a black hole. According to every theory, nothing can survive past the event horizon. There's no way to cross into another universe. And yet here we are, Dr. Chen said, his voice grim. And I'm telling you, Captain, the data supports it. The black hole isn't just a death trap, it's a bridge to something else. And it's not just empty space on the other side, it's something alive. The word alive hung in the air like a curse. Cruz looked at the rest of her crew, all of whom were too silent for her liking. Even the experienced astronauts aboard had been trained to handle high-stress situations. But this was beyond anything they had been prepared for. We need to find a way out, Cruz said, her voice hardening. Can we slingshot out of here? Use the gravitational pull to escape? Dr. Chen shook his head. We're too deep. The gravity here is unlike anything we've ever experienced. I don't even know if the slingshot maneuver would work. The gravitational forces are so strong that our trajectory is being pulled in one direction. I fear if we try to escape now, we'll be torn apart. Cruz's mind raced. If they couldn't escape, then what? They were trapped in an alien dimension, with no way of knowing what horrors awaited them. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the eerie silence, the inexplicable anomalies, and the sense that something ancient and malevolent was reaching out to them from the other side. I need you all to keep calm, Cruz said, her voice steady, though she didn't entirely believe the words. She knew fear had begun to take root in every one of them. She had to keep them focused. We'll figure this out. We're the best team humanity has ever assembled. We've made history, and we will get through this. I won't let anyone die here. But even as she spoke, the air in the control room grew colder, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in this strange, dark place. As the hours dragged on, the crew began to feel the effects of the black hole's distorted reality. Time was slipping in odd ways. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like days. Their bodies grew fatigued, their minds strained, and the ship seemed to hum with a strange energy. But it wasn't just the passage of time that was unnerving. It was the feeling that something was watching them, something that had been waiting for millennia to make its presence known. Around midnight, though it was hard to say exactly when, given their distorted sense of time, the first disappearance occurred. It was Lieutenant Marcus Rivera, the communications officer. He had been seated at his station, working diligently to re-establish contact with Earth, when something strange happened. One moment, he was there, tapping on his console, muttering under his breath about the signal interference. The next, he was gone. No sound, no warning, just an eerie silence. Cruz felt the shift immediately. "Marcus!" she called, her voice trembling. The rest of the crew turned in confusion. The lights above flickered. There was no sign of Rivera. "Where did he go?" Dr. Sterling whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The team scrambled, searching every part of the ship. Cruz's heart pounded in her chest as she checked the security feeds, but the cameras only showed empty hallways. Rivera was gone. Completely. "It doesn't make sense," Cruz muttered. "He was just here. He couldn't have..." But she stopped herself. She could feel it in her bones. Something was wrong. Something had taken him. Something from the other side of the black hole. Minutes stretched into hours as the crew tried to make sense of the impossible. They checked the ship again and again, every corner, every compartment, but there was no trace of Rivera. Only an unsettling emptiness. "Captain," Dr. Chen said, his voice thin with fear, "we're not alone. We're not just trapped in this black hole. There's something on the other side of it, something that's reaching out, something that wants to come through." Cruz stared at him, her mind reeling. "What are you saying?" "I think it's already here." The next few hours were a blur of panic. The crew was on edge, their nerves fraying as the reality of their situation set in. They were trapped in a black hole, yes, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was that they weren't just facing an inanimate force of nature. They were facing something alive, something malevolent, something that had been waiting for this moment. Then came the second disappearance. This time, it was Dr. Maya Sterling. She had been working in the lab, trying to understand the biological implications of the black hole's effects on living organisms. When Cruz went to check on her, the lab was empty. The lights flickered one last time, casting long shadows in the corners of the room. Dr. Sterling was gone, just like Rivera, with no trace left behind. Fear spread like wildfire among the remaining crew. There was no denying it now. They were being hunted. The question now was, would they be able to escape? The black hole, before whatever was lurking on the other side, claimed them all. Captain Valeria Cruz was no stranger to danger. She had flown through asteroid storms, navigated collapsing solar systems, and faced countless other life-threatening situations. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to understand. And the deeper they went into the black hole, the more she realized they weren't just exploring a cosmic anomaly. They were uncovering something that defied every law of physics, every rule of logic, every instinct of survival. And with every passing moment, they were getting closer to it. The disappearance of Dr. Maya Sterling, like the sudden vanishing of Lieutenant Marcus Rivera, had left the crew shaken. Fear had spread like wildfire, leaving everyone nervous, tense, and suspicious. Cruz knew she had to act fast before the crew descended into full-blown panic. "Report," she said firmly, trying to mask the unease in her voice. She turned to Dr. Chen, who had become the unofficial leader in terms of understanding the strange phenomena they were encountering. "We can't ignore it any longer, Captain," Dr. Chen said, his voice taut. His eyes were wide with the fear that none of them had yet voiced aloud. "The readings, they're showing a consistent anomaly in the energy matrix. Something from outside our universe is trying to breach the barrier between dimensions." Cruz's mind raced. "How do we stop it?" Chen hesitated. "I don't know if we can. The very fabric of reality is starting to bend. If we go any further, we might not just be lost to this black hole, we might rip a hole into our own universe. If we stay on this course, we'll either vanish or become part of whatever is waiting." Cruz clenched her fists. The consequences of staying were devastating, but leaving was no guarantee of survival either. What if they made it out, only to find that whatever this force was had crossed over into their universe? What if they were already too late? They were trapped between two insurmountable dangers. She forced herself to take a deep breath, suppressing the rising panic in her chest. "I need all available data. We're not going anywhere until we understand what we're dealing with." But as she gave the order, something strange happened. The ship, the Odyssey, groaned again, a low rumbling sound that reverberated through the walls. The lights flickered and then went completely dark. The crew was plunged into an eerie, suffocating blackness. The hum of the engine ceased, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, Cruz thought they had been swallowed whole by the singularity. "Status!" Cruz barked into the darkness. There was no answer. "Chen! Sterling! Anyone!" she shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. After what seemed like an eternity, a dim emergency light flickered to life, bathing the control room in an eerie, blood-red glow. Cruz's pulse raced as her eyes darted across the room. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air. Someone was there, but she couldn't see them. And then she heard it, a soft, whispering sound. Not quite words, but an unmistakable presence, a voice too distant to understand, but close enough to feel, like a distant memory you couldn't quite recall. Cruz. It came again. Only this time, she could swear she heard a faint guttural growl at the end of the name. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She turned to her crew. Everyone was looking at her, their eyes wide with fear, their faces ghostly pale. No one had spoken, no one had moved. "Who said that?" Cruz demanded, her voice hoarse, but no one answered. Dr. Chen, his face ashen, was staring at a console with wide eyes. "Captain, you need to see this." She stepped forward, trying to quell the unease building in her stomach. She looked at the screen, and her breath caught in her throat. On the monitor was an image, distorted but unmistakably there. A figure, hazy and translucent, stood in the center of the room, a dark, shifting silhouette outlined by an unnatural, pulsating light. It was like watching a ghost form out of the ether. No, not a ghost, something far worse. "What is that?" Cruz whispered, her voice barely audible. It's an imprint," Dr. Chen said. His voice wavered as he processed what he was seeing. "It's not a solid figure. It's a manifestation of something from the other side. A creature or an entity trying to break through." Cruz's stomach turned. This was no longer just a scientific expedition. This was a battle for survival. But against what? Something was coming through, and it wasn't just watching them anymore. It was learning how to reach them. The screen flickered again, the ghostly figure distorting into a mass of swirling shadows. And then, in an instant, the image was gone. But the presence remained, lingering in the air, like a cold breath on the back of Cruz's neck. "It's not just any creature," Dr. Chen continued, his voice rising with mounting fear. "It's ancient. This thing has been trapped on the other side of the black hole for eons. It's been waiting for the right moment to cross into our universe. And now we've given it that moment," Cruz said quietly, the realization sinking in like ice water. "By coming here, by crossing into this place, we've opened the door." Dr. Chen nodded. "We've triggered something we don't understand, and now we're its target. This thing wants to break free. The full scope of their situation was beginning to hit Cruz with terrifying clarity. They weren't just trapped, they weren't just exploring. They had unwittingly opened a gateway to a malevolent force, one that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right time, the right people to bring it through. And they were the ones who had pulled the trigger. "How long do we have?" Cruz asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of the words pressing down on her. "Not long," Dr. Chen said. "If the entity can fully manifest, it will have the power to manipulate the very fabric of reality. We might cease to exist entirely, or it could cross into our universe and destroy everything. I don't know how to stop it, Captain." Cruz's mind raced. They had to make a choice. Stay here and try to contain it, risking everything, or try to escape, knowing that they might bring the entity with them. She turned to the rest of the crew, meeting each of their eyes. Fear was written on their faces, but there was something else too, a resolve. They knew what they were up against, and they knew that if they were to survive, it would be together. "We won't let it through," Cruz said firmly. "We'll stop it. We need to find a way to reverse whatever we've done. We're not going to die here." The crew exchanged glances, uncertainty mixing with determination. They were facing something far beyond their comprehension, but they were also humanity's last hope. They couldn't give up. Not yet. But as Cruz turned back to the monitor, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The figure from the screen, faint but unmistakable, was back. And this time, it wasn't just an imprint. It was moving, coming closer. The entity was breaking through. The sight of the entity breaking through the fabric of space sent a shiver of terror through Captain Valeria Cruz. The air in the control room had grown colder, the once familiar hum of the ship's systems now replaced by an eerie stillness. Her mind raced, heart pounding, as she realized the depth of their predicament. The presence on the other side of the black hole was no longer an abstract theory. It was real, and it was coming for them. "We need to act now," Cruz said, her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread in her chest. "Dr. Chen, is there any way to reverse what we've done? Can we close the gateway?" Dr. Chen's hands were trembling as he worked feverishly at the control panel, but his voice was calm, measured. "I don't know, Captain. The data doesn't suggest a way to reverse the process. Everything we've learned points to one thing: once. The black hole has been used as a portal. There's no shutting it down. We've destabilized the event horizon. It's like the hole itself is expanding, and with it, the entity's ability to cross over." Cruz closed her eyes, trying to focus. The black hole had not only pulled them into its gravitational grip, but it had also begun to warp reality itself. Time was moving differently. The stars outside seemed to blink in and out of existence. Nothing was stable anymore. Not the ship, not the universe, not even their minds. "How much time do we have before it fully manifests?" Cruz pressed, her voice low and strained. Chen hesitated before answering. "It's hard to say. The entity's presence is distorting the ship's systems. I'm seeing fluctuations in the space-time continuum around us. The longer we remain here, the more it will feed off our own reality. It's feeding off our fear, our confusion, and the deeper we go, the stronger it becomes." A cold silence settled over the crew. Fear wasn't just an emotional response now. It was a physical presence, something tangible that threatened to consume them all. Cruz could see it in their eyes. Her crew, who had been trained to face the most dangerous missions space had to offer, were now grappling with a force they couldn't understand. And that uncertainty was far more terrifying than any alien life form they had prepared for. Suddenly, the ship lurched. The control panels blinked with erratic lights, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. It felt like the black hole was trying to pull them even further into its depths, to drag them into the very heart of the singularity. Cruz's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair as she fought to keep her composure. "What the hell?" Dr. Sterling's voice trembled, her breath shallow as she stared at the monitors. It's like we're being pulled apart. The black hole's gravity is increasing." "It's not just gravity," Dr. Chen said, his voice strained. "The entity, whatever it is, it's messing with our systems. It's trying to manipulate the ship's trajectory." "Manipulate?" Cruz's voice was sharp with disbelief. "How? It doesn't even have a physical form." But Chen's answer was interrupted as the ship jolted again, this time much harder. The lights flickered, and then, as if some invisible hand was squeezing the very life out of them, all systems went dark. The control panels went silent. The hum of the engines stopped. For a brief moment, everything was still, and then the voices started. At first it was soft, just a whisper, like a distant murmur carried on the wind. Cruz froze in her seat, her pulse racing as the sound echoed through the ship. It was as though the very walls were alive, murmuring unintelligible words, foreign and ancient. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, more urgent. It was a low, guttural sound, something primal, something from beyond human comprehension. And it was coming from every direction, filling the ship with a sense of dread that made it impossible to think straight. There was no escape from the voices, no place to hide. Then, without warning, the whispers stopped. A terrible silence descended, but something was different. The ship had changed. Cruz blinked, her eyes stinging as if she had been in a bright light too long. The dim emergency lights flickered back on, casting harsh, uneven shadows across the control room. Everything seemed off. The walls seemed to ripple, distorting, as if they weren't solid. And then, as she looked around, Cruz noticed something far worse. The crew members, her crew, had changed. Lieutenant Rivera, the first to disappear, was standing by the window, staring at nothing with empty, unblinking eyes. But it wasn't him. Not really. His face was contorted in a grotesque, unnatural way, his skin pale and stretched too thin. His mouth hung open, as though frozen in mid-scream. Dr. Maya Sterling, gone, disappeared without a trace, now stood in the middle of the room, her form flickering in and out of existence. Her eyes were black, wide with an otherworldly fear, and her body seemed to pulse as though she was being slowly drained of her life force. No. No, Cruz whispered, stumbling backward. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, an effect of the black hole's gravity warping their minds. It was the only explanation. They were losing touch with reality. Captain! Chen's voice was a strained whisper. He had turned toward her, his face pale, sweat slicking his forehead. His eyes were wide with terror. They're not real. They can't be. Cruz's hands shook as she looked around. She knew what they were seeing wasn't real, but the fear in her chest told her otherwise. The hallucinations, the twisted figures of her crew, weren't just visual distortions. They were a manifestation of something much darker, a reflection of the entity's power over their minds. The creature on the other side wasn't just manipulating the ship, it was manipulating them too. This isn't real, Cruz muttered, her voice shaking as she stumbled toward the control panel. We're hallucinating. We're all hallucinating. But even as she said it, she felt the cold hand of doubt creep in. Was it a hallucination? Or was it something far worse? Something that had been unleashed from the black hole? Something that had the power to twist reality? To pull them into its dark, twisted realm? The air in the room grew colder, and the whispers returned. Louder now, more insistent. They weren't just coming from the walls anymore. They were coming from inside her head. The voices, shifting, hissing, grating, were filling her mind with thoughts she didn't want to hear. You shouldn't have come. You are mine now. There is no escape. The realization hit her like a freight train. The black hole wasn't just a portal, it was a doorway to something far older, far darker than anything they could have imagined. The entity that resided on the other side wasn't just a force. It was a being, a parasite, a predator that fed on fear and pain, on the very fabric of reality itself. And it was feeding on them now, weakening their will to survive. Chen, Cruz said, her voice low and strained, we need to get out of here. We need to leave before it consumes us all. But even as she spoke, she knew the terrible truth. There was no escaping. The black hole had them, the entity had them, and whatever it was growing stronger with every passing second. The whispers were getting louder. The walls of the Odyssey seemed to breathe, their surfaces warping and undulating like liquid, as if reality itself was melting under the pressure of the black hole's pull. The ship's once pristine, cold metal corridors now appeared like an alien landscape, twisting and bending in ways that defied the laws of physics. Cruz's mind raced, but every thought was a struggle. The grip of the entity was tightening, seeping into their minds, breaking them down piece by piece. They were all losing their grip on reality. I can't take it anymore, Lieutenant Rivera muttered under his breath, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of a console. His once confident demeanor had been replaced by an overwhelming, palpable fear. His eyes darted around the room, as though expecting something to leap from the shadows. "We're trapped. We're never getting out of here." "Shut up, Rivera," Captain Cruz snapped, her voice cold and authoritative. She couldn't let her crew lose control. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. She knew fear had a way of spreading like wildfire in situations like this, but she had no time for it. Not anymore. Rivera looked at her, but his eyes weren't the same. There was a hollow, empty quality to them now. He was barely even there. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Cruz," he whispered, his voice distorted. "It's already inside my head." Before Cruz could respond, Rivera turned and staggered away, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He muttered to himself, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's already inside me." Cruz's heart sank as she watched him leave. She knew that if they weren't careful, if they didn't act fast one by one, they would all fall under the entity's influence. They would all lose their minds and, ultimately, their lives. "Chen!" Cruz called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "Do you have anything? Any idea how to stop this thing?" Chen, his face pale and drawn, was still staring at the monitors, his hands shaking as he typed in commands. His brow furrowed in concentration, but it was clear he wasn't seeing the information in front of him. The voices were getting to him too. The air around them was thick with an oppressive force that made it almost impossible to focus. "I'm trying, Captain," Chen said hoarsely. "But it's like the black hole itself is feeding off of us. I can't. It's changing. The way the systems are responding. We're not just trapped in space, we're trapped in time, in reality itself." "What do you mean?" Cruz asked, her tone incredulous. "How could we be trapped in reality? We're still in the same universe, Chen. We're still—" Chen cut her off. "No, Captain, not anymore. The black hole, the entity, it's distorting the very fabric of our universe. The rules of time, space, everything we thought we understood about reality, they're breaking down. The black hole is more than just a singularity. It's a portal, a bridge to another dimension, and as we go deeper, the walls between dimensions are becoming thinner." Cruz's heart raced as she absorbed his words. "So, what you're saying, we're not just dealing with an alien presence, we're dealing with something that can manipulate reality itself." Chen nodded grimly. "Yes, and it's getting stronger. It's using us as a conduit to enter our universe. The more fear we show, the more unstable we become, the more it can break through." Cruz's mind reeled with the weight of the revelation. Every second they spent in the black hole, they weren't just losing time, they were losing themselves. A heavy silence fell over the crew. The only sound was the soft hum of the emergency systems as they tried, unsuccessfully, to stabilize the ship's systems. Cruz's head pounded as the whispers grew louder again, this time almost deafening. It was as if the entity was everywhere at once, crawling into her mind, feeding on her fear. "You are mine now. You cannot escape." Cruz pressed her hands to her, ears trying to block out the voice, but it was no use. It was inside her head, echoing in her thoughts, clawing at her sanity. The others were no better off. Lieutenant Rivera had gone silent, but the look in his eyes was worse than ever. A void, an emptiness that spoke of a mind completely consumed. Dr. Chen's hands had stopped shaking, but his gaze was distant, unseeing. Dr. Sterling was still, flickering in and out of reality, her eyes black as night, her movements jerky and unnatural. They were all losing their grip. One by one, they were succumbing to the entity's influence. And as much as Cruz tried to fight it, the whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent. Louder. "Give in, Cruz. You cannot fight what you are becoming." For a moment, Cruz thought she could hear the sound of something real, something tangible, shuffling in the shadows behind her. She spun around, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. But there was nothing there, Just the flickering lights and the distorted shadows. She was losing it. All of them were. This wasn't just a black hole anymore. It wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was an infection spreading through their minds, consuming them from within. Cruz gasped. "We have to find a way to break free, now!" Chen didn't respond immediately. His eyes were unfocused, and for a moment, Cruz thought he had fallen into some kind of trance. But then he spoke, his voice low and hollow. "We can't leave, Cruz. We're already too far in. The entity is inside us. It's in our thoughts, our memories. There's no escape." "No," Cruz said, shaking her head fiercely. "There has to be a way." But even as she spoke the words, a part of her doubted them. What if Chen was right? What if they were already beyond saving? What if they were all already lost? Suddenly there was a loud, sickening crack as the ship shuddered violently. Cruz was thrown to the floor, her head slamming against the cold, metal surface. She struggled to push herself up, her vision swimming as she glanced around. The walls were warping again, the ship groaning under the strain of the black hole's gravitational pull. "Captain!" Dr. Sterling's voice was a high-pitched wail. Cruz turned just in time to see the flickering figure of Dr. Sterling lunge. Toward her, her face contorted in a grotesque mask of fear and madness, and then in a flash, she was gone, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared, swallowed by the black hole's event horizon. "No!" Cruz screamed, scrambling to her feet. No, no, no. The crew was breaking apart. Their minds, their bodies, everything was unraveling. And the worst part was that Cruz could feel herself slipping too. The whispers had been constant, but now they had become overwhelming, suffocating her thoughts, drowning her will to fight. She couldn't give in. "Not yet. We have to escape. We have to make it out of here," Cruz said, her voice raw and strained. "We have to try one last time. Escape." Chen's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes wide with terror. "It's too late. We're already—" "No," Cruz interrupted him, her voice shaking with fear and determination. "We can't just give up. We can still fight this." But as she said the words, she knew they were running out of time. The black hole was pulling them deeper and deeper into its grasp. If they didn't act soon, they would all be consumed, body, mind, and soul, by the entity that waited on the other side. Cruz took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. She had to fight. She had to find a way out. The pressure of the black hole was unbearable. Every moment felt like an eternity, the ship groaning under the strain as it plunged deeper into the heart of the singularity. Time itself was beginning to lose its meaning, warped and stretched, beyond recognition by the crushing gravity. The walls of the Odyssey seemed to bend and warp, flickering between reality and some other plane. Nothing was solid anymore, no space, no matter, no logic. Just an infinite, suffocating darkness. Captain Valeria Cruz stared out into the void through the shattered window, watching as the stars warped into streaks of light, pulled and twisted by the relentless force of the black hole. The whispers in her mind were louder now, maddening, all-consuming. Her thoughts no longer felt her own. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. They were running out of time. She could feel it. Every second spent in the event horizon of the black hole was a second closer to losing everything. Her crew was gone, each of them slipping further into madness, consumed by the entity on the other side. And with every passing moment, the dark force was gaining strength, ready to break through into their universe. "We can't stay here," Cruz whispered to herself, though she knew the words were hollow. She had no choice. There was nowhere to go, no way out, not anymore. "It's your fault," the voice in her mind hissed, like a snake coiling around her thoughts. "You opened the door. You brought us here." "No," Cruz muttered, shaking her head. "No, I didn't. We had no choice. We had to know. We had to find out." But the entity wasn't listening. It never had been. It was no longer just the whispers. Now Cruz could feel the presence of the entity, a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. Its influence had seeped into her very being, twisting her thoughts, pulling her deeper into the abyss. She could feel it moving through her, through all of them. It was the presence of 1,000 minds, 1,000 dark desires, all bound together in a single, insidious consciousness. The black hole was not a singularity. It was a gateway, a conduit between worlds, and what waited on the other side had been patiently watching, waiting for the right moment to break through. Chen, Cruz breathed, turning to the last remaining member of her crew. He was slumped in the corner, his eyes wide and unblinking, his body trembling. He had given up, the terror of the black hole and the entity having consumed him completely. But Cruz couldn't afford to give up. Not yet. Chen, we can still make it out, Cruz said, her voice desperate, pleading. We have to find a way to shut it down. Please. But Chen didn't respond. He just stared blankly ahead, his eyes hollow and lost. The entity had taken him. It had already begun to break his mind. You can't save them, the voice whispered again, its tone full of cruel amusement. It's too late for them. It's too late for all of you. Cruz felt her heart beat faster. She was running out of time, out of options. And yet, there was one final, desperate chance. It was crazy, reckless, suicidal, but it was the only hope. They had left. The plan was simple in its execution, but catastrophic in its potential consequences. The black hole's gravitational pull was the only thing keeping them tethered to this dimension. The deeper they went, the more unstable the ship became, the more reality itself warped and twisted. Cruz had studied the theory of the event horizon, the point beyond which nothing could escape. But the black hole wasn't just a singularity, it was a portal to another world, one that the entity was using to cross over. To stop it, Cruz had to do the unthinkable. She had to use the black hole itself. Chen, listen to me, Cruz said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. We can use the gravitational pull of the black hole to slingshot back into our universe. We'll need to fire the engines at maximum thrust, adjust the trajectory, and hope for the best. Chen's eyes flickered as if a sliver of his former self was beginning to emerge from the madness that had overtaken him. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Cruz wasn't sure if he understood or if he even cared. The entity had already consumed him, but Cruz had no other choice. She couldn't do this alone. Chen, please, she pleaded, stepping closer. We're running out of time. The entity will break through if we don't act now, if we don't make it back to our universe. Chen finally looked at her. His eyes were empty, lifeless, but there was something else in them, a flicker of recognition, of understanding, I'm not going back, Captain, Chen whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm already gone. The words hit Cruz like a punch to the gut. She had known deep down that it was too late for him. Too late for all of them. The black hole had already taken them. It had already consumed their souls. But Cruz couldn't stop now. She couldn't give up. Not when everything was on the line. Cruz staggered toward the control panel, her hands shaking as she punched in the necessary commands. The ship lurched again, the gravitational pull of the black hole growing stronger by the second. She had no idea if the plan would work. The theory was sound, but theory and reality were two very different things when it came to something as dangerous and unpredictable as a black hole. There was no margin for error. If they miscalculated, if they didn't hit the right angle, if they didn't make it out of the event horizon in time, they would be trapped forever. And worse, they might inadvertently release the entity into their universe, bringing about the end of humanity. The crew was gone. The ship was falling apart. Time was slipping away. Cruz had no other choice but to act. Chen, she whispered, almost too soft for anyone to hear. Forgive me. With a final, desperate press of the button, Cruz initiated the thrusters. The ship shook violently as the engines roared to life, pushing them away from the black hole's deadly pull. But as the ship began to move, something strange happened. The walls around them flickered, reality itself bending and warping as though it were being torn apart at the seams. Cruz's breath hitched as the entity's voice, louder now, filled her mind. It was angry, desperate. "You cannot escape. I will follow you. I will always follow you." The ship lurched again, and this time, Cruz didn't know if it was the black hole's gravity or the entity's wrath that was pulling them in. The walls of the ship seemed to close in on her, and for a moment she thought she was suffocating. The air grew thin, cold, as if something was sucking the life out of her. But then, nothing. An intense, crushing silence. The ship's systems began to flicker back to life, and Cruz gasped as she saw the stars outside. The event horizon was behind them. They had made it, but at what cost? But the silence was deafening. For what felt like an eternity, Captain Cruz stared at the stars outside the Odyssey's viewport, her hands trembling on the controls. The ship had broken free. They had slingshotted out of the black hole's event horizon, the gravitational forces pulling them back toward the safety of their universe. Cruz had done it. Against all odds, against the relentless pull of the black hole and the malevolent force that had stalked them from the other side, they had escaped. But even as the familiar constellations blinked back into view, Cruz knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. She turned slowly, her gaze falling on the empty seats. Lieutenant Rivera was gone. Dr. Sterling was gone. Dr. Chen, too, though she had been certain he was lost before the final maneuver. The crew, once a united team of explorers, was now scattered, lost to the black hole, consumed by the entity that had awaited its chance to cross into their universe. And Cruz, she was the last one standing. But at what cost? The entity had followed them. She could feel it, its presence gnawing at the edges of her mind, whispering to her in dark, twisted tones. It was still there, still waiting. "You think you're free?" The voice echoed, cold and unforgiving. "You can never escape me." Her heart pounded in her chest as her fingers clenched around the console. She fought the urge to listen, to give in to the growing darkness, but deep down she knew it was right. They hadn't escaped. They had only delayed the inevitable. Cruz stumbled back from the console, her breath shallow. She thought of the crew, of the people she had failed. The weight of their deaths pressed on her chest, suffocating her, making it harder to breathe, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't break down now, not when everything they had worked for, everything they had endured, was on the line. There had to be a way to stop the entity, to contain it before it destroyed their universe, before it consumed everything. The dark whispers began to take shape once more, growing louder, more insistent. Cruz gritted her teeth, her fists clenched, as she fought to push them out. "You are mine, Cruz. You will never escape. You cannot run from what you have set into motion." But then, something strange happened. The voice, once so overpowering, faltered. It trembled, as if something was blocking. Cruz's eyes snapped open. She realized then what had happened. The black hole hadn't just pulled them in, it had weakened the boundaries between the two universes. But now that they had escaped, the entity no longer had direct access to their universe. It had been tethered to the black hole. And without the singularity, without that connection, its power was waning. For a moment, Cruz dared to hope. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter now, the vast emptiness of space stretching out before her. The weight of the black hole's grip had lifted, and for the first time since they had entered the abyss, Cruz felt free. But that freedom came with an unbearable cost. Her crew was gone. They had sacrificed everything, their lives consumed, by an ancient evil, all for the price of knowledge. Cruz looked down at her shaking hands, taking a deep breath as she stood tall once more. The entity, though weakened, was still there. It still lurked at the edges of her mind, still trying to reclaim control, but Cruz wouldn't let it win. She couldn't. Not after everything. She had to stop it, once and for all. With a grim determination, she turned away from the viewport and walked toward the central command. The ship's systems were stable now, but the damage had been done. The black hole had irrevocably changed them. Their universe was no longer safe. The rift between dimensions was still open, and the entity had tasted their world. It wouldn't rest until it had claimed it. "The Odyssey," Cruz murmured, touching the ship's worn console. "We're not done yet." The stars ahead were beautiful, but they were no longer a symbol of hope. They were a reminder of what had been lost and what could still be lost. Cruz knew that she couldn't let the entity take the universe. It would take everything it could from them, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. She glanced back at the empty seats once more. There would be no more exploration, no more discoveries. Not until she could ensure the entity was contained. She had to find a way to close the rift, to seal the wound between universes. The only way forward was through the truth of what had happened here. She couldn't let fear rule her. She couldn't give in to the whispers that beckoned. With one last glance at the darkness behind her, Captain Cruz set her course. Not toward the stars, but toward a future where the threat of the entity no longer loomed. The mission had changed, but it was not over. It would never be over.